We also have to recognise that this will go down as a dark day in our country's history and one that will be remembered. People will ask, which side were you on? And I stand with the millions of people that oppose genocide because I am one of them. I oppose the blood-soaked hands of this government trying to silence us. So I say this loudly and proudly on Wednesday the 2nd of July, 2025, we are all Palestine.
Order!
No, we're not.
No, we're not.
I understand what terrorism is. I was in London on the 7th of July in 2007, and I watched my community, this city, attacked by real terrorists. And at that point, rightly or wrongly, I decided I was going to Afghanistan to fight the terrorists. And I went because I love this country and I love our democracy and I want to see it protected. I think today's prescription order against Palestine Action undermines that.
Interestingly, during all of the anti-apartheid years, the British government, whilst it did condemn the ANC and did indeed believe for a while that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, never banned the ANC in Britain.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to speak specifically about Palestine Action. I think it's most regrettable that the government has brought one order banning 3 organisations when it knows that there is a political disagreement on this. This is no way to bring terror legislation. I want to be clear and to put on the record that I would be supporting this order today if it only referred to the organisations Maniacs, Murder Cult and the Russian Imperial Movement. Leading legal and human rights organisations, Amnesty International and Liberty, have condemned the potential prescription of Palestine Action. Liberty has said that targeting a protest group with terrorism powers is a shocking escalation of the government's crackdown on protest. This move would be a huge step change in how counter-terror laws are applied. Amnesty International UK has said that we're deeply concerned at the use of counter-terrorism powers to target protest groups. They certainly shouldn't be used to ban them. They have both urged the Home Secretary to rethink before bringing this to Parliament. Yesterday, several United Nations special rapporteurs, including those for protecting human rights while countering terrorism and for promoting freedom of expression, said they had contacted the UK government to say that acts of protest that damage property but are not intended to kill or injure people should not be treated as terrorism. Likewise, former Labour Justice Minister Lord Charlie Faulkner has stated that the sort of demonstration seen at military base by Palestine Action would not justify prescription as a terrorist organisation. Today, however, we are not voting on whether people agree with Palestine Action's tactics. We are not voting on whether people think their aim is right or wrong. We are voting on whether the actions they have taken against property, not against people, should lead to them being treated as terrorists, when what they have done can be prosecuted under criminal damage, and indeed there is a long history of protest activity, including acts of trespass, criminal damage, sabotage and more. Indeed, the Home Secretary's recent statements on this repeatedly refers to criminal damage, and the live court cases showing that there is already legal provision to deal with Palestine Action. There are a variety of potential consequences if this prescription against Palestine Action is passed today. Supporting or joining Palestine Action could carry up to 14 years in prison. It risks criminalising thousands of volunteers and supporters. Thousands have supported or volunteered with Palestine Action, including students, nurses, retirees and professionals. Many have never engaged in direct action, but risk being criminalised. Today I met with Amnesty International and they offered a number of frightening examples of how this could be used to place our constituents at risk of prosecution under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act and could face a maximum sentence of 14 years if Palestine Action are prescribed. Amnesty International's examples: a person who tweets, "I oppose the war crimes in Gaza and I do think Palestine Action have a point," could easily fall foul of this provision. A person who says to another person, "I don't support all the methods of Palestine Action, but I really do think protest is important and I respect the personal sacrifices Palestine Action are willing to make, risking arrest to challenge war crimes." An individual with a placard that reads "Palestine Action are peaceful, they should be de-prescribed." This could affect our constituents who have never been a member of Palestine Action, who have never committed direct action, who would never commit direct action, and speeches they make or comments they make in community meetings could be trawled, and these people could end up facing legal proceedings of up resulting in a prison sentence of up to 14 years. That concerns us all. People out there view terrorism as meaning heinous acts such as shooting people, blowing people up, assassinating people, and acts of violence. I would urge colleagues to consider the consequences to their constituents of prescribing Palestine Action alongside these other groups.
Sultana. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 21 years ago, a human rights barrister stood in court and defended an activist who broke into RAF Fairford trying to disable a bomber to prevent war crimes in Iraq. That case became a landmark in lawful, non-violent direct action against an illegal war. That barrister is now our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, KC. He argued that it was not terrorism but conscience. Fast forward to 20th of June 2025. Two Palestine Action activists enter RAF Bryce Norton and sprayed red paint, not fire, on aircraft linked to surveillance flights over Gaza. Instead of prosecuting them for criminal damage, which is what normally is done, the Home Secretary is using the Terrorism Act to prescribe them as a terrorist group. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an unprecedented and dangerous overreach of the state. Never before in Britain has it been a crime to simply support a group. This order lumps a non-violent network of students, nurses, teachers, firefighters and peace campaigners, ordinary people, my constituents and yours, with neo-Nazi militias and mass casualty cults. Palestine Action's real crime, we have to be clear, is shutting down Elbit system sites that arm the Israeli military. Its true offence is being audacious enough to expose the blood-soaked ties between this government and the genocidal Israeli apartheid state and its war machine. So let us be clear, to equate a spray can of paint with a suicide bomb isn't just absurd, it is grotesque. It is a deliberate distortion of the law to chill dissent, criminalise solidarity and suppress the truth. Amnesty International, Liberty, over 266 senior lawyers, UN special rapporteurs have all opposed these draconian measures. Even at this late stage, the order should be withdrawn. Under this order, anyone expressing moral support for a prescribed group could face 14 years in prison. That includes wearing a badge, wearing a t-shirt, sharing a post or calling for proscription, and journalists have no exemption too. There is no legal protection for reporting favourably, even factually, about Palestine Action, and by this weekend millions of people, including many of our constituents, could be placed under these sweeping restrictions. And let us not forget what is actually happening in Gaza, where the real crimes are being ignored. Hospitals bombed, children starved, tens of thousands of people killed. Palestinian children now suffer more amputations per capita than anywhere else on earth. Israel on trial for genocide at the ICJ. Israeli Prime Minister with an ICC arrest warrant, and the government's response to criminalise solidarity, to continue exporting lethal F-35 jets that are decimating Gaza. And we have to also understand the history of this country and what built our democracy, the tradition of civil disobedience, from the suffragettes without whom I wouldn't have the vote, let alone the privilege of being here as an MP. Even those who oppose Palestine Action's tactics must recognise the vast gulf between criminal damage and terrorism. If this order passes, what's next? Climate protesters, striking workers, feminists in the street? Already we've seen a wider crackdown on our civil liberties. Musicians censored, journalists arrested, demonstrating, including MPs sitting here harassed. And now this government wants to use anti-terror laws to make peaceful protest itself a crime. If our democratic institutions functioned as they should, none of this would be necessary. So to conclude, if this prescription passes, as it will, we have to understand that no campaign will be safe tomorrow. We also have to recognise that this will go down as a dark day in our country's history, and one that will be remembered. People will ask, which side were you on? And I stand with the millions of people that oppose genocide, because I am one of them. I oppose the blood-soaked hands of this government trying to silence us. So I say this loudly and proudly. On Wednesday, the 2nd of July, 2025, we are all Palestine.
Order!
No, we're not.
Hi, Lewis.
Caught me off guard there. Can I firstly associate myself with the comments of the front bench for Lib Dems? I thought they made some very, very good comments, and I'd like to associate myself with them. Secondly, I agree with the prescription of the two far-right fascist organisations, and I think they should be prescribed. But can we as a House accept there are those of us here today who have a different take on today's prescription for Palestine Action. We don't have to agree with the behaviour or actions of Palestine Action to make the case here today that this prescription is wrong. I'd also like to ask the honourable members to acknowledge the fact that many of us here today who take a different view on this issue are a part of this democracy just as much of those who agree with the prescription. It's just that our take on the delicacy of our democracy and what this prescription does and how it undermines our democracy, in our opinion, happen to differ from other people. I know members on the opposite benches have repeatedly said that when it comes to ULEZ cameras and low emission zone cameras, they've actually said that they understand and empathise with those constituents who have smashed and vandalised them. So direct action is something it's not just of the left, it's something that everyone in our democracy can partake in. So this is a judgment call on how we best protect our democracy, and an acknowledgement that not all threats are external or violent. Some threats are based on the decisions that we here ourselves take in this place. Sometimes we may take decisions which fundamentally undermine our own democracy. Now, I have no doubt that some of us will be called terrorist sympathisers by some who disagree with our position. But that would be wrong. When you look around the world and watch as democracy and the rule of law is being systematically smashed, corporations, the wealthy, have increasing power and wealth to influence our democracy. Look over at the Atlantic, at the United States. Our democracies are delicate. Our democracies are precious. And the decisions that we take here determine whether those democracies will survive as we go into the future. I look around the world. I look around this country. I look at the party, the authoritarian right party, that is 10 points ahead in the polls. And I worry about the future of our democracy. That means that this government, our government, has to make decisions that take that into account. That take into account that we may not be in government one day. It may be the authoritarian right. And they will take this further and faster and deeper than we ever have. So we should be putting in fire guards now, protecting our democracy. This doesn't do that. And I will conclude by saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand what terrorism is. I was in London on the 7th of July in 2007, and I watched my community, this city, attacked by real terrorists. And at that point, rightly or wrongly, I decided I was going to Afghanistan to fight the terrorists. And I went because I love this country and I love our democracy and I want to see it protected. I think today's prescription order against Palestine Action undermines that. And I wish my government wouldn't do it. Thank you very much.
Pete Wishart.
Deputy Speaker, as we've heard, the issues around the prescription of Palestine Action has thrown up a number of legitimate concerns, and there's no doubt it will have an impact on our right to protest or on civil liberties that we have enjoyed for decades. And where it's absolutely and utterly right to condemn and prosecute criminal activity, especially those that threaten our national security, surely this must be done within the framework of existing legislation as it always has been. And this order looks nothing other than a direct response to Palestine Action being able to infiltrate an RAF base and causing damage to a defence aircraft. The decision to prescribe an organisation is ultimately a matter for the government, and it's up to the Home Secretary to decide who goes on that list. It's based on intelligence that the government holds. But I don't think the Minister has convinced many of us today that this has met the thresholds for this prescription, and we need to hear more about their concerns about this particular group. But before reaching for that power, the government must take into account whether it is proportionate, justified and in the national interest to prescribe such an organisation. Terrorism legislation, as we know, hands extremely broad powers to the state, and as such it must always be treated with the highest degree of caution and restraint. Now, we live in a society where groups and organisations have the democratic right to campaign and express their views on particular issues in a democratic, respectful and lawful manner. It is important that the right to lawful protest is not affected by the Home Secretary's decision today, and it's extremely concerning that this decision could lead to these powers being extended to other campaigning organisations. And it's inexplicable that Palestine Action has been linked to groups such as the Maniacs murder cult and the Russian imperial movement, groups unknown to this House until this order was on the order paper today, but groups that, with a cursory glance at their activities, could of course be prescribed. For Palestine Action to be included alongside these groups is at best a cynical and calculated move by the government in order to ensure that this order gets through today. People all over the UK, including many of my constituents, rightly feel very strongly about the appalling crimes being committed against innocent civilians in Gaza on a daily basis. Many of these people have been taking part in weekly protests to make their voices heard, to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. These people are now concerned that they might be caught up in this prescription. And I'm also concerned that many young people who are sharing social media posts from Palestine Actions could now be considered as glorifying what will soon be a prescribed group. We need clarity on what actions would result in people being charged under this terrorism legislation. For example, does wearing a Palestine Action badge handed out at a demonstration or a rally mean that they could be charged with terrorism? Organisations, as we've heard, like Amnesty International and even the United Nations have expressed their concern about this prescription regarding the UK's broad definition of terrorism. This week, Madam Deputy Speaker, an Israeli strike in Gaza seafront cafe killed at least 20 Palestinians. This is what we should be discussing today and every day until a permanent ceasefire is reached and all the hostages are released. The government must act in the national interest. That is what they've got to do. And they've got to keep us safe from all of these different challenges that's presented to them. But we need clear reassurance about the wider impact of what is being proposed today.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the debate opened today, I intervened on the Minister and I'm grateful to him for giving way. I just need an explanation, and I hope we'll get one, as to why groups are always put together in these orders and not dealt with separately and individually, because clearly there are different orders of concern here. Yeah. And I want solely to speak about the issue surrounding Palestine Action. We live in a democratic society and we have to also understand where our rights have come from. The member who's just spoken from High Peak represents the place where, in 1932, the mass trespass took place, led by Benny Rothman, a Jewish activist in the Communist Party at that time, who was demanding rights of access to the countryside. He was roundly condemned by all of the mass media and the government of the day. He was put on trial, he was put in prison, and he was eventually released from prison after mass protests in his support. Without Benny Rothman and those others, that access to the countryside simply would not have happened at that time. And you look at all the other people that over decades of our history have stood up for free speech and for democracy, going back to the Chartists, going back to the suffragettes, those that campaigned to end apartheid in South Africa. And interestingly, during all of the anti-apartheid years, the British government, whilst it did condemn the ANC and did indeed believe for a while that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, never banned the ANC in Britain, because the advice they got was it was important that there be a place that people could express that voice of hope of the end of apartheid. The women that went to Greenham Common to protest about the deployment of nuclear weapons there were also never labelled as terrorists. Yes, they were charged under criminal trespass, as indeed many, many others have been, and indeed those that undertake direct action are very well aware of the risks they take. But it crosses an enormous threshold to suddenly announce that Palestine Action, speaking out against the horrors of what is happening in Gaza, where hundreds are mown down every day by the Israeli Defence Force simply for queuing for food when they're desperately hungry and their children are starving. Surely we should be looking at the issue that Palestine Action are concerned about, and the supply of weapons from this country to Israel, which has made all this possible. If this order goes through today, it will have a chilling effect on protests. And I quote a letter that was sent to the Home Secretary on the 28th of June, Direct action is a long-standing and respected part of British political history, from the suffragettes chaining themselves to railings, to striking miners, to anti-apartheid campaigners, occupying institutions and disrupting trade, civil disobedience and direct action that have always been a necessary forces for progress and justice. And that letter comes from, I won't give away now, that letter comes from Bibi Khan, the chair of North London Council of Mosques, and Mohammed Uddin from the Newer Muslim Forum on behalf of the London Councils of Mosques, who are concerned about the chilling effect that this piece of legislation, if agreed today, will have on the rights to protest as a whole. The last point I'd make, and I hope the Minister, if he gets a chance, will be able to reply on this, legal action is being taken. There is a case coming up in the High Court this Friday, a judicial review of this case. Can we have it be clear this will not be put into force until all legal avenues have been exhausted, and there won't be some temporary imposition of this later to be withdrawn if there is successful legal action. I think we need to know that all democratic avenues have been fully explored in this process.